One of the biggest draws to being in a band is the glory. Almost every generation of rock bands can express indulging in the more free-spirited behaviour that comes with being admired by millions of fans. On the other hand, not everyone goes into this job for the attention. A lot of the times, musicians never want their music to reach a huge market, and are more often than not mortified when they actually reach beyond their intended target. Even if they ended up with some strange moments during their tenure, these musicians' struggles with fame have brought us some of the most interesting careers that the rock world has ever seen. I am Kirsten from WhatCulture Music, and these are 8 musicians who hated being famous. Number 8. Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa will forever be known as one of rock's most eccentric characters. Throughout his career, the man played by his own rules and did whatever the hell he wanted to, regardless of whether there was a market for it. Instead of buying into the hype machine of the music industry, Zappa used his entire career as an opportunity to troll. Starting off in the 60s, Zappa's first few years saw him indulging in the psychedelic stylings of the time. Hating what the hippie culture stood for, Zappa came out with an album entitled We're Only In It For The Money, where he and his band posed in a garden as parody of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album. It didn't stop there though. Even when going through his later work, Zappa would make bold left turns in order to divert his audience. When fans would be waiting for another art rock experience, Zappa would flip and make his second record a jazz-flavoured epic or an operatic rock odyssey. Being a staunch advocate for anti-drug use, Zappa remained the one musician that was so anti-rock, yet fit perfectly with the rest of the crowd. For all the times he intentionally tried to kill his momentum, there were still legions of fans going along for the ride. Number 7. Thom Yorke from Radiohead. Radiohead had truly made the 90s their own by the end of the decade. While the grunge scene was in the rear view and Britpop had started to wane from relevancy, no one could have predicted these potential one-hit wonders were going to set the rock world on fire with albums like The Bends and OK Computer. The only problem with their rise was Thom Yorke's inability to cope with the attention. Being a fairly introverted person, Yorke was completely desensitized when the band's OK Computer took the world by storm. By the time the band went on tour to promote it, Yorke was a mess and would even disappear before the show started. One particularly uncomfortable instance came when he put on street clothes and left the arena hours before the show, only to find himself in the subway with thousands of Radiohead fans as he came back to start soundcheck. Wanting to break away from his rock star reputation, Yorke took the band down a darker path with Kid A, whose cold and calculated sound was one of the most daring musical ventures the band had ever undertaken. While Radiohead are still pumping out great music to this day, don't expect Yorke to be signing autographs on the regular anytime soon. Number 6. All of Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd first emerged in the late 60s, sounding like your typical psychedelic act. Across their first few releases, the songwriting of Syd Barrett was a bit weird, but endless entertaining at the same time. However, fame would become a funny thing for every single member of the group. It all started when Barrett's abuse of drugs led him to the brink of insanity, after which he left the group and went into hermit-like seclusion. Drafting in David Gilmour, the band continued to expand upon their sound as their audiences got bigger and bigger. Once the band got finished with their album, The Dark Side of the Moon, they were almost completely adrift. Much of the band's later output would be bassist Roger Waters venting his frustrations with fame in song, from the corporate greed of Welcome to the Machine to the condemnation of the business mindset on Animals. In the ultimate display of facelessness, Waters built his grand vision, The Wall, to be centered around a man losing himself to the rock star lifestyle and eventually closing himself off from society. The pain of sudden attention may have been hard for most of these guys, but it did end up giving us some of the most timeless rock music ever made. Number 5. John Frusciante, Red Hot Chili Peppers. The Red Hot Chili Peppers lived up to their name in the 90s by becoming one of music's most in-demand acts. Off the strength of the albums Blood Sugar Sex Magic, the band's songs were being played all over MTV and radio right alongside the grunge acts of the day. While the band was taking in all the attention, John Frusciante was not having any of it. Unlike his bandmates, Frusciante never anticipated the Chili's actually getting that big and was quite content making his living as an underground rock band. As soon as the band blew up, Frusciante's subdued nature found it hard to relate to the thousands of people who were showing up to gigs every night. With fans and press clamouring to him at every corner, Frusciante kept all of his energy bottled up inside and started to spiral. Finding refuge in his drug addiction, Frusciante would end up going through bouts of depression and would even end up involuntarily country, sabotaging the band's SNL appearance when he played the beginning of Under the Bridge out of step with the rest of the band. Frusciante ended up quitting the band shortly afterward, choosing to make more artsy music until his eventual return in the late 90s. For as high energy as the Chili Peppers were, the sudden slew of fame ended up sucking the life out of one of its most soulful musicians. Number 4. George Harrison from the Beatles. The Beatles have become so omnipresent in rock culture that they almost seem to transcend being mere celebrities. Even if they set the world on fire in the 60s, the quality of the music hasn't dwindled with age, as each generation picks up guitars based on something that the band created. On the other hand, not all of the band members were necessarily comfortable with their rapid ascent. Once Beatlemania got underway, the entire band felt a sea change, with cameras and mobs of people chasing them around everywhere they went. Though anyone could get perturbed about this lifestyle, George Harrison was probably the most hostile towards his newfound celebrity. Always identified as the quiet Beatle, Harrison was known to be the most brutally honest of the Fab Four, which caused tension when the band would go out on tour. With the media on them at all times, Harrison had instances where he would throw water on cameramen and even once punched a cop who was assigned to protect him because of how aggressive he was. On the other hand, Harrison was eventually able to work his celebrity to his advantage by helping raise money for the thousands of people traumatised in Bangladesh. He may not have been ready for the hot spotlight, but George Harrison found a way to redirect his star power towards something worthwhile. Number 3. Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam. During Pearl Jam's big break, Eddie Vedder was absolutely miserable. Though the band was making music history with their hard rock debut 10, Vedder had always planned to be in a band that had an organic rise rather than shooting up to the top from the start. With the band playing festivals and stadiums around the world, Vedder started to fully seize control. Seeing himself as the de facto spokesman for the group, Vedder did everything he could to downplay his celebrity status, which involved everything from not making music videos to even suing Ticketmaster to make sure the band's concert tickets were being kept out of the fans' reach. Though many admired his attention to art, Vedder started to control the music even further. Across later albums like Vitalogy and No Code, the band's sound started to shift from the blend of classic rock and angst to more off-the-wall tunes that sounded like they could come off of a Captain Beefheart record. While it was still Pearl Jam at its core, Vedder deliberately took different artistic directions in order to test who his true audience really was. Even if he may cringe at being called a rock star, Vedder's everyman attitude in the spotlight has given him another stripe of fans who love the authenticity in his music. Number 2. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. Kurt Cobain was never meant to have a major wave of attention come his way. Once Smells Like Teen Spirit sweep the nation though, Cobain found himself being talked up as the next rock genius. Cobain's automatic response to this kind of attention was to withdraw, with very few interviews and touring appearances. Whenever he did give a word to the press, most of his quotes involved him sticking up for the local scene in Seattle and downplaying the band's breakthrough release, Nevermind, as a piece of poppy trash. Though Cobain did have aspirations to be a rock star of sorts, he wasn't ready to be hit with every single aspect of it at once. This got so bad that the band's landmark hard rock release, Nevermind, didn't have any kind of promotional tour, with the band taking time at home to gather themselves. Once Cobain finished up the difficult follow-up in Utero, the touring life still proved to be too much for him to handle, leading him to eventually commit suicide in his home in 1994. Number 1. Bob Dylan. From the moment he first picked up an instrument, Bob Dylan knew that music had a way of moving people beyond dancing. When he started to pair his poetic condemnations of the world with a couple guitar chords, Dylan had hit upon something more powerful than any other band could hope to achieve. However, people weren't focusing on the music as much as they should have. When Dylan started seeing his songs like Blowin' in the Wind climbing up to the charts, he started to notice something strange happen. Instead of the audience embracing his songs, fans became transfixed on Dylan himself by heralding him as the spokesman of the 60s generation. Whenever asked about it in interviews, Dylan routinely shrugged off his reputation so that people would focus on the music. Even when analysing the lyrics, fans would try to pick Dylan apart to find the true meaning behind these lyrics, which he would remain tight-lipped about. The reputation as Dylan as the rock prophet became so concentrated that Dylan even ended up making the album's self-portrait to shake off his godlike shackles. He may have been able to come to terms with it later, but Dylan's journey from humble folk singer to saviour of rock and roll definitely left him a changed man. And there you go, the 8 musicians who hated being famous. But let us know who your favourite musician is down in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and don't forget that little bell as well to be notified of any new videos that come your way. But for now, I have been Kirsten Ria from WhatCulture Music, and I will see you in the next video.